Emma was a psychologist. Her job revolved around unraveling the complexities of the human mind, and she thought she had a grip on fear. But that changed the day she brought home the mirror. It wasn't something she had planned to buy. She was walking past a small, dusty antique shop when the ornate silver frame caught her eye. It seemed out of place in the cluttered display, almost calling out to her. The shopkeeper, a frail old man with a distant look in his eyes, hesitated when Emma handed him the money. "This mirror, it doesn't suit everyone," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Emma smiled politely and shrugged it off as an eccentric remark. She carried the mirror home, not knowing she was bringing far more than an antique into her life. At first, it was just another piece of decor. She hung it in her living room, admiring how it caught the light. But by the second night, she began to feel uneasy. The first time it happened, she was walking past the mirror. Out of the corner of her eye, she thought she saw her reflection pause, lingering just a second too long. She stopped and stared at the glass. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. "Get a grip," she muttered to herself, shaking off the strange feeling. But deep down, a part of her couldn't let it go. By the third night, Emma's unease had grown into something she couldn't ignore. She sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, but her eyes kept drifting toward the mirror. Her reflection was there, as it should be, but something felt wrong. She got up, slowly approaching the mirror. Her reflection stared back, but the longer she looked, the more certain she became. It wasn't moving the way it should. Emma raised her hand, and her reflection mimicked her, but its movements were ever so slightly delayed. And then it smiled. Emma stumbled back, her chest tightening with fear. Her rational mind screamed that it wasn't possible, that she was imagining things. But no amount of logic could erase the image of that unnatural smile. The whispers started that same night. At first, they were faint, soft, indistinct murmurs that seemed to drift through the room. She tried to convince herself it was the wind or the hum of the refrigerator. But as the nights went on, the whispers became clearer. They said her name over and over in a voice that sounded eerily like her own. "Emma, Emma." She recorded the sounds, hoping to prove to herself that it was all in her head. When she played the recording back, the voice was unmistakable. It was real. Desperate for answers, Emma turned to her colleague and closest friend, Dr. Alan Graves. She played him the recording, her hands trembling as she pressed play. Alan listened in silence, his face growing pale. When the recording ended, he looked at Emma with a seriousness she had never seen before. "Emma, you need to get rid of that mirror," he said. "I've tried," she whispered. "I threw it out, but it came back. I smashed it once, and it was whole again the next morning." Alan leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "Then it's not just the mirror. It's connected to you now." Emma didn't want to believe him, but the evidence was undeniable. She dug into the mirror's past, scouring old records and archives. What she found sent chills down her spine. The mirror had belonged to a woman named Margaret Lorne, an artist known for her haunting self-portraits. Margaret had died under mysterious circumstances, surrounded by shards of the mirror. Witnesses claimed they heard her scream moments before her death. In Margaret's final journal entry, Emma found a chilling warning. "The mirror reveals your deepest fear, but it doesn't stop there. It takes you." That night, Emma Emma stood in front of the mirror, her hands clenched into fists. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Her reflection didn't answer immediately. It just stared at her, its eyes glinting with something almost alive. Then it began to smile, a slow, sinister grin that didn't match the fear on Emma's face. "I want to trade places," it whispered. The room grew cold, and the air felt thick, almost suffocating. Emma tried to back away, but her feet wouldn't move. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and her reflection reached out, its hand pressing against the glass. Emma felt an invisible force pulling her toward it. "Let me show you what fear really feels like," the reflection hissed. Emma screamed, struggling against the pull. She grabbed a heavy book from the table and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, shards flying everywhere. The force released her, and she collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. For a moment, the room was silent. But as Emma looked around, she saw the shards of glass scattered across the floor. Each one still held her reflection, but none of them moved in unison. Some smiled, others frowned, and one shard showed her reflection, mouthing a single word: "Soon." Emma spent the next day covering every reflective surface in her apartment. She avoided her own reflection, even in the smallest glimpses. But no matter what she did, the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent, invading every corner of her mind. That night, she noticed something new. As she sat in the dark, staring at the wall, her shadow began to move. It stretched unnaturally long, twisting and turning until its head turned to face her. Emma froze, her breath caught in her throat. The shadow smiled. She realized then that breaking the mirror hadn't freed her. It had only spread the curse, multiplying the terror in ways she couldn't comprehend. And now, there was nowhere left to hide.